I'm working on the Threadripper 2950X Unraid rig, 3 workstations. You'd think that with 16 cores, 32 threads, it would be quite a bit, but to give you an example, I got a 1080 Ti here on one of my primaries. This one's running 8 threads, and it's doing pretty well. We're holding around 60 frames. Sometimes it drops a little bit, and of my 32 gigs RAM, I've given it 12, and it's doing pretty well. It's keeping within 8 of the 12, but eventually I'd like to go to like 64 gigs and give these machines more. And then this is setup number 2, and I've also got another copy of Final Fantasy running on it, but it's only running 4 cores, 8 threads, and my frame rate's not as high. And you can see if like the 8 gigs of RAM, it's because it was 16 8 8, or well, I had to actually do 12 8 8 and then some to the Linux UI, but it's still loading in. It's constantly drawing like 40 megabytes a second off the hard drive here as it's like loading up the RAM, the VRAM. It is filling slowly. Sure makes a difference when you're on PCIe SSDs, but it's working. I'm also doing some downloads and stuff, and like here's the Unraid breakup. Like my RAM's like right cranks, 96% of the 32 gigs that I have. And then those are the first 4 cores that you see. So you got an overall, and then these 4 cores and these 4 hyper-threading cores are on this machine here, and then the next 4 here are running machine number 3, which is over here. And I've just got Age of Empires on a 980 going right now, and of course that game's not very demanding. I want to actually go more demanding and put it under a 3D load, but my UPS is saying I'm already drawing 830. I've seen it up as high as 900. And that's without the 980 doing a lot, where that UPS can really only handle about 1,000 watts before it'll cut out. But so those 4 cores right now that aren't under a heavy load, those ones are running Age of Empires. And then after those 4 cores, I've got my bottom 8 cores here and the 8 hyper-threading, and that's what's actually running Final Fantasy right now. And you can see even under that, like those cores are fairly heavy loaded. Final Fantasy is pretty big, but it's not maxing them out like it is here. And like those are maxed out at a point that my frame rate, I don't think my CPU can keep up enough. So by the looks of it, at like 4.1 gigahertz on the Threadripper, you really do need like 8 cores to each unit. So like as many cores as I have here, really it should only be 2 1080 Ti's and 8 cores, 16 threads to each workstation. But it is working as a triple, just not on like whatever they call them, AAA title games that are very demanding. But like it is running, it is playable. 40 frames a second is not as high as I'd like it to be, but it does play fairly smooth. It's not too bad. And these are, again, I've got these settings absolutely cranked. VXAO, like everything, Hairworks, like everything is running on those 1080 Ti's, and like they are cooking right now. Like when we go back here and listen, you can hear the fans are just ripping. Like those fans are ripping. So, and I'm drawing a fair bit through the cooler to keep it right now. That's the triple 120 rad cooler that's up in there for the Threadripper, but really I got to go from 32 gigs up to about 64 for it to work better to handle like the RAM requirements. But for the most part, like it is quite playable. It's just AAA games, sure, maxing out those 4 cores there, which I mean at any one time if I want to, I can shut down rig 3 and then throw the other 4 cores on rig 2 and then just run the 2. So it's kind of nice having that ability that I can just make that change. And then like on top of that too, I've got all 3 of them like installing, and they're not installing games too to different hard drives. So my PCIe lanes that are going out to either the triple NVMe drives, or I've got 2 SSDs in RAID, or I've got 6 other hard drives that are rated out too. I'm installing to all of them as fast as I can. So I've got the system under like a full crunch right now, where I may actually have a little better CPU performance and pulls and stuff if I wasn't installing. But putting the system through its paces, it seems stable, everything's working. I did have to use a few neat tools though to figure out the topology of Threadripper and what dies are associated with what. And it was really neat because there's actually in Linux there's user scripts. I downloaded and installed software in the user scripts that like I just put the files or whatever into the Unraid Linux UI that allowed me to from the command be able to punch out basically like a PNG file of the topology of what cores go to like what die head, and then on top of that what memory slots, what PCIe lanes, what are connected to each one, which really helped me dedicate out this video card and these to reduce the amount of cross communication through the Infinity Fabric and just dedicate things out directly, which I think in the end did give me quite a performance boost. Like look at those cores, they're just about maxed right out right now, but everything's running pretty good. And I think like Infinity Fabric's on like a minimal usage communication back and forth just to keep it open in case they do need to pull, but it seems to be working pretty well. And then message service interrupts, MSIs. So for some reason when I'm installing the VMs, even though my video cards and my audio that's attached to the video cards, because it is technically seen as a separate PCIe device that, well, it's not a separate PCIe device, but it's another split off of it. They weren't running MSI. They were running an older like LCPI interrupt. So I ended up having to go in. You can do it manually, but I found like just basically a quick written program that lets you go in, reads the registry, puts all of them into MSI mode, and then put the priority high for your video and certain things like that. And that really helped with like a bit of a stutter. I was getting an audio under heavy loads from the other ones, but I ran that on all three of the machines. And as soon as I did that, I got better performance in the video, the audio stopped chopping, even under like a heavy stress load like this, where the CPU is really pulling, the PCIe lanes are all running, like I've got this board working. It doesn't seem to affect audio at all in anything I've seen on any of the machines, and the video is performing, you know, quite respectably, except it is a little bit CPU bound on only 4 cores, 8 threads, as you can see. Like this game is a real AAA. Like it really pushes those threads hard, even for having like 8 threads. Like a lot of those threads are in the 50s to 60 range on 8 threads, right? And the game just loves RAM. Like if I had 32 gigs of RAM in there, it'd be using like 16 of the 32 instead of the 7 or 8 of the 12. And like it's wanting to pull up to like 8 gigs of my 11 gigs of video RAM too, right? Like it pulls pretty hard, but that does really help with how much it's swapping on the hard drive to keep the frames up. So in the end, a little more RAM may really help with the CPU draw too. Like I'm not sure, but I'm gonna give it a try and see. And then I don't always have to run 3 rigs. I can just set her down, make a quick adjustment, fire up rig number 2 with 8 cores on it instead of 4 cores, and be able to run 2 of these games pretty top notch. So I'm fairly happy with the way Unraid's working right now. One thing I did find is, even though you can technically share over the network with the Unraid drives and then install games for like Steam on it and then use the same copy of it, if one of the devices is using the Steam game, then it ends up locking out files, so the other 2 can't. So I just ended up dedicating out hard drives to each one for separate installs, which means you do end up with like 3 copies of the game. I know there's like a shadow library system that you can use that helps with it, but in the end, for performance, everything else, I just dedicated out like rated hard drive sets to each of the machines. I actually rated SSD and then rated hard drives to the lesser systems. And then I still ended up having, I think, an 8 terabyte shared network drive on Unraid that'll handle media and everything else for like Plex, but pretty happy with it. It seems to be working well.
Gotcha.
The other thing too, you can't have multiple of the same device, but I did manage to like dedicate out certain USB controllers and things like that. And one of the things that I did do is every one of them has a USB Bluetooth, so it can have headphones, it can run the Xbox controllers, it can do whatever. So like Jake, he's got his Xbox controller and his headphones hooked up to it. I can hook up, you know, the Xbox controllers or headphones to this if I want, or this system, and it all keeps them separate. even though two of the controllers are the USB Bluetooth or the exact same model. And part of the reason why is Linux can't tell the difference between them. They don't have unique identifiers, so it just sees both. I was able to run one of them just direct pinned out, and then the second one I ran out just through like a controlled USB. And what that does is any of the devices that are on that, it doesn't, like Linux won't see that, so it doesn't see the secondary device. And it's worked anyways. You can swap them back and forth. Everything's working really well. Honestly, very happy with the whole setup. The whole system seems to be working really well.